ग्लोबल स्किल डेवलपमेंट मिशन में आपका स्वागत है।
As we know, everything up until this point has been destructive, meaning that if I save and close out of my image after applying perhaps a photo filter of some sort to it, that I can no longer go back to the original. So I've got to show you how to non-destructively color correct your images. Do you want to change up our image? Let's go and grab a different file. I'm going to close out of this guy and I won't bother saving. From the project files folder, I'm going to go and grab windows.jpg. Okay, give this guy a second to load up here. Now, we're actually going to wind up making use of a variety of panels. So what I'm going to do on the right-hand side is I'm going to go and expand out all of my panels. And as a matter of fact, it's the adjustments panel that I want. Okay, so make sure you have your adjustments panel handy. If you don't see them on the right-hand side, you know to head to the window menu, right? Window and then down to adjustments, and you should be ready to roll. Now, inside the adjustments panel, we just see a whole series of icons or buttons. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But if you hover over top of them, you'll start getting their names up in the top left corner of the adjustments panel. So there's brightness, contrast, levels. Hey, wait a minute. Where have we seen this before? Curves, exposure, vibrance. The heck? They're all in here. So many of the commands, I shouldn't say all, but many of the commands that we have underneath the adjustments menu are also available from the adjustments panel. Why would I use the panel instead of the menu? Because the menu versions of these commands are permanent changes. The paneled versions of these commands, brightness, contrast, levels, curves, and so on, are non-destructive. They're going to create what's referred to as an adjustment layer. And this is exactly what we're going to talk about in this exercise. Okay? So I think to get us started here, let's use something very simple. Let's use our brightness contrast. We've already been introduced to the traditional brightness contrast. So from adjustments, I'm going to click on the brightness contrast icon. Go ahead and choose that guy. And all of a sudden, the properties panel springs to life. And wouldn't you know it, brightness and contrast sliders, right? Exactly like you and I saw in the previous exercises, but now we're getting the paneled version of that command, if that makes sense, okay? Now, I'm not really trying to achieve anything specific inside this image here. I'm just kind of monkeying around here a little bit with the sliders. Maybe I'll use the auto command to let Photoshop take a crack at adjusting this image. There we go, something like this, okay? Now, here is the, what do they call it? The pièce de résistance. Here it is. I'm going to head back to my layers panel. There's my background layer, which of course is locked. And there's brightness contrast, specifically brightness contrast 1. This guy here is what's referred to as an adjustment layer. Okay? Now, what this means is that the brightness contrast color correction command that you and I just applied is actually applied to the layer, not to the actual image itself. Where is the original image? He's hidden underneath the brightness contrast adjustment layer. And at any point in time, I can go and disable my color correction. Again, in this case, brightness contrast, and I can see the original down beneath them. Okay? So quite honestly, in the real world, I am not using Photoshop's traditional color correction commands at all. I'm doing everything with adjustment layers. Okay? And I would highly encourage you to as well. So what's cool about an adjustment layer is at any point in time, I can go back to that adjustment layer, then I can go back to properties, and I can continue monkeying around with the sliders, trying to get an effect or trying to get a correction that's going to work for me, right? I save the file into the native Photoshop file format .psd, and then at any point in time, I can come back into this image, grab the adjustment layer, go back to properties, and continue monkeying around until I get things looking decent. Okay, so this is non-destructive color correction at its finest here inside Photoshop. Okay, now check this out. Let's say I've got this brightness contrast adjustment layer and I'm kind of going, I'm not really feeling it. I wonder if levels would be a better choice. I'm going to deactivate my brightness contrast adjustment layer, and I'm going to make sure my background layer is selected. I'm going to go back up to the adjustments panel. I'm going to look for my levels command now, and I'm going to give him a tap with my mouse. The properties panel springs to life again, now giving me the paneled version of the levels command with the histogram and the sliders and all the rest of it. Okay? So once again, I can get in here and I can start reassigning some pixel color values or lightness values, if you will, perhaps something like this, perhaps adjusting that midpoint one way or another way. Maybe it's some kind of a special effect that I'm after, something like this. Back to layers, and now I have 2 adjustment layers. Let's compare levels back to the original brightness contrast, something like this. Or I go, geez, that brightness contrast really isn't doing a whole lot. I'm going to grab him, go back to properties, and maybe make some further adjustments, maybe something like this, and something like that. Who the heck knows, right? Back to the layers panel. So we can quite literally edit and tweak and adjust our image for as long as we want until we can get it absolutely perfect. Okay? So there you go, your adjustment layers. Very cool stuff. Now check this out. What I'm going to do, there's more to show you. I'm going to grab both of my adjustment layers just by holding down Controller Command, and I'm going to drag and drop them down onto my trash can icon at the bottom of the layers panel, taking me all the way back to my original. Okay? There's another way to create adjustment layers inside Photoshop. Rather than going from the adjustments panel, more often than not, I'm going from this guy here, this drop-down menu here at the bottom of the layers panel, create a new fill layer, which you and I saw earlier, that solid color fill layer, or we can go and create an adjustment layer. There they all are, brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, and so on and so on. Let's try a photo filter maybe, a photo filter adjustment layer. As soon as I choose the command, I'm booted over into the Properties panel, and I go, hold on, wait a minute, what happened back inside the Layers panel? There's the Photo Filter Adjustment layer created for me. Inside Properties, we can go nuts, of course, as we saw inside the command there. So whatever kind of an overlay, whatever kind of a filter I want to apply to this guy, maybe something like this, okay? And again, it's all using adjustment layers, all non-destructive.